open mic event. Today, we're honored to have Dr. Melissa Hall, who will be presenting on making documentation easier, which I think most therapists will be really interested in. Since this is a recorded webinar and not a live one, we are going to have Q&A through the app. So if you visit the community section on the app, we will have a post from Melissa's Q&A. You can search for her name, or you can search just the word documentation, and you can post questions and Melissa will answer them through the app. You'll get a notification when she answers. I will also send out those instructions if you're receiving this by email, or I will post them on our website as well under free CEUs. So the other thing is, to receive your CEUs, make sure to fill out the form on our website, and we will email those out to you within 2 or 3 days. You should be set. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Melissa. She's going to take over and give you the rest of the presentation, and I'm really excited to hear how I can make documentation easier. So go ahead, Melissa.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Welcome, everyone. And today we're talking about 8 great tools to make documentation easier. So to start out, a little bit about me and why the heck do I want to talk to you about how to make documentation easier. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I have a lot of experience in the quality assurance field. So I have worked as a quality assurance manager, and I'm currently a QA director for a healthcare company. And in that experience, working with therapists, I've seen so many people who have questions about documentation. And the thing that I hear most often from people is, we never learn anything about this in grad school. I feel so unprepared for private practice. So I decided to start a business called QA Prep, where I teach therapists how to make rock solid documentation so that you can spend more time with clients and less time on paperwork. So that's what I like doing, and I really like focusing on the clinical quality of paperwork and not the fact that it's just paperwork that has to be done. So I hope that really comes through in the webinar today. Please do bear with me. We had to reschedule this webinar, which is why you're getting a recording. So I'm still not 100% yet, but we should be okay. So a little bit about what we're going to go over today. So I'm going to introduce you to some tools as well as strategies for making paperwork easier. Most of them are free. 2 of them are paid tools, so but they're not anything that I promote or that I get an affiliate fee for. They're just things that I think could possibly be useful. I would recommend, since we're going to go through 8 tools that you could use, just choose 1 or 2 to implement at a time. So as you're going through the presentation, maybe take some notes or see what really catches your eye or what seems most relevant for you at the time, and then pick 1 or 2 things to try and work on, and then slowly make those adjustments as time goes on. All right, so the first thing, and I know it's going to sound a little corny, but the first thing is truly a positive attitude. This is really key for avoiding resentment, because documentation is just as much for you as it is for the client. And the attitude that we have with documentation, really, it's the place to start. So, I want you to think about when you sit down to write notes, how does that feel for you? Are you stressed out? Do you get anxious? Do you feel resentful? Do you think about all the other things that you want to do or things that you think might be more important and focus on those? And that attitude you have when you're doing your documentation is really, really key for how well your documentation is going to going to look and how well you'll be able to do it. Documentation is a lot easier if you choose to think about it a little bit differently. So I recommend that, before you sit down to write notes, especially, that you find a positive space, so that you take just a minute to breathe, and see documentation as a chance to reflect on your sessions. And that's really what it is. I like to think of your client files as telling the story of your client's journey in treatment with you. So it's not just about, CYA, or about making sure that you feel you have everything together in case there's a subpoena. Your client file can actually be a beautiful book or a beautiful story that talks about your client's journey. So thinking about that differently can actually save you a lot of frustration and resentment with paperwork. So make sure when you sit down to do your notes that you are taking time to have that positive space. Also, I would say, when you focus on making the documentation meaningful, you're less likely to focus on just getting it done quickly, and just trying to get it done and get out of there. And ironically, that actually makes the documentation go a little bit more smoothly, because you get a moment, you're thinking it through, it flows, and then it's done. So positive attitude is really the number one. All right, so the next thing would be a documentation schedule. And the key is to make sure that your schedule is individualized to your needs. So try to keep as best you can. Obviously, things come up, right? Like, I was sick this week and couldn't do this webinar. You'll get sick and won't be able to do your notes or see clients. But as best you can, keep a regular schedule with your documentation, and make it work for you and for your practice. So some different options that people find helpful are, daily notes are obviously the ideal, right? So if you leave your office and all of your notes are done for the day, you have nothing else to worry about. That's perfect. That's what we all strive for. That's not always realistic, and that's okay. But if you're someone who tends to stress out a lot afterwards or think about things afterwards, then maybe daily notes would be the best fit for you. So there are different options with daily notes. You could do this between clients. So you see a client from 1 p.m. to 1:50 p.m., do a note for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that. See the next client at 2 o'clock. That's awesome, because at the end of the day, then you're totally done. You don't have to write a bunch of notes. You just write your note for your last client and you head home. For me, that was not something I could do. It just wasn't feasible. I really needed that time in between clients, more for myself, to reflect and get ready for the next person. So that wasn't what I did. But I do know people who are able to do this, and it works very well for them. Another option is to do your notes at the end of the day. So you see maybe 4 or 5 clients in one day, and then at the end of the day you do those 4 or 5 notes. So maybe it takes you 45 minutes at the end of your day, and then you're done. You can leave, you can go home and forget about things. That's also another great option. If you tend to have evening appointments, maybe you don't want to be in the office writing your notes from 8 to 9 p.m., totally understandable. What worked really well for me personally was I would do my notes at the beginning of the next day. So Monday I would see clients. Tuesday morning when I came in, I would do all the notes from the previous day. And then I did that before I saw any clients the next day. So those are a couple of different options that still keep you really up to date. Another option is to do weekly notes. So some people have what they call like an administrative day. Maybe Mondays you don't see clients, you only do things like answer phone calls, do billing things, do your notes. I would recommend, maybe at least 2 days per week, depending on how many clients you see, depending on when you see your clients. If you see clients every day, maybe you only have 2 or 3 days a week that you see clients. But this can work really well for people because you can kind of get yourself in space, do all your notes, get them done, spend 2 hours, and then it's over. I wouldn't recommend doing notes less than weekly, because then it's really difficult to remember what happened. There's so much going on with all of our lives and with all the different clients we see. And then when you start to see someone more than once, and you haven't done notes from last week, you haven't done notes from the week before, you're seeing them a third time, it can, those last three sessions can all kind of start to blend together. So it's difficult to remember what happened when. So I would definitely recommend keeping up with your notes at least weekly. However, I will tell you that it is super common for therapists to fall behind in their documentation. I know from talking with a lot of therapists that many people have a lot of around this, um, but I would say don't worry about that. It's a lot more common than you think. It's just that we don't really talk about it. No one's going to networking meetings and talking about how they're 2 months behind in their documentation, but guess what? Someone at that networking meeting likely is. Um, so I would say, the key is really if you have that happen, create a catch-up plan that's realistic, and base it off of this documentation schedule. But having a regular schedule will really help you to avoid that. And then if you end up getting 1 week behind, that's a lot easier to catch up on than 1 or 2 months. Okay, so the next thing is that I would definitely recommend electronic record keeping as a really helpful tool to make documentation easier. Um, so these are typically called practice management systems, or electronic health records. There are a lot on the market for individual private practitioners. Also, there are a lot on the market that allow for people who have a group practice. There's so many options. Um, this is one of the paid tools that I would recommend. So usually you pay like a monthly fee. And a lot of them are not that expensive. There are great electronic health records for $30 to $40 a month, which is totally doable for most therapists, and worth every penny, I guarantee you. So one of the things that they provide is for really easy storage and movement. So you don't have to worry about if you move offices, what are you doing with your files. You don't have to worry about having things double locked, and um, you also don't have to worry about things like um, having your files easily accessible by others. Um, I know a lot of therapists tend to be a little bit scared of, the internet or electronic records. But hopefully, if you're here through ShrinkSeek, you're using the app and you're starting to look at electronic tools, how they can be helpful. Um, and electronic health records are actually much, much safer than having your files done on paper. So they are not accessible for theft, which is much easier for someone to break your office than it is for them to uh, break into an electronic health record system. It's much easier. I know some people choose to do their notes on their computer, so they're not kept in files, but then you have to do all of those encryption methods, and your computer could still be stolen or destroyed at some point, and then you lose all of those records. Most practice management systems are cloud-based, so they've already gone through all of the process of making sure everything is HIPAA compliant, making sure everything is encrypted, and and then it's much more difficult for anyone to access that information. Okay, so that's my little plug on why it's safer. Another great thing about electronic health records is that a lot of provide reminders for your clients. So they may be text reminders, email reminders, however your clients choose to communicate with you about appointments. Um, so that can kind of cut down on no-shows, things like that. Um, And, different people have different opinions about that, but it is typically common to get reminders from most health professionals. So it's not out of the norm for therapists to do that as well. Another thing is that it will integrate a calendar. Any good electronic health record will have calendar integration, so you're able to do things like maybe put in your documentation schedule, put in your open slots, and then many of them will allow your clients to have access to the calendar as well. So if you allow clients to do rescheduling, then that can be an option. Most systems will also pre-populate forms, so you can upload your forms into the system, have them in there, um, easily email them off, or they'll have a client portal where clients can go in there and they'll have a password, and that way they can access documentation that you have, um, and they don't have to worry about printing things out, carrying them around. They'll also usually pre-populate things like super bills or monthly schedules, so that way you're just doing your regular scheduling clients, doing your notes, and then it pre-populates the CMS 1500 form, which is awesome. So you're not having to do separate um, paperwork. And it's available to you at any time. So it's using the cloud, so you can log in from home, you can log in from your office, any time of the day. So if you haven't checked out electronic health records, I would definitely recommend it. Um, Again, you can find really great systems for $30 to $40 a month uh, subscription. All right, so templates is another thing that I would recommend. I would definitely recommend, along with having a regular documentation schedule, that when you're writing your notes, that you use a consistent template. It just makes things a lot easier because in your mind you start to formulate your notes the same way each time, so it's less time for you to think about what to put in what section. It's also great because you have, these prompts that you're being given. So you're not having to think about, oh, did I miss something important, or how to formulate a certain session or anything like that. It's really easy to just pop in the information to the template and then you're done. So these are 4 templates that I would recommend that are useful and fairly common. So you've probably seen at least a couple of these before. DAP, it stands for Data, Assessment, and Plan. So you'll see a lot of these different sections are in the different templates there. So data is just objective information. So what happened in the session that day? What was your mental status kind of stuff? How did the client look? Did they cry? Did they appear anxious? Were they fidgeting? Did they arrive late? Anything like that could go into data, just observable, objective information. And then assessment. So the assessment is your assessment of how the client's doing, or your interpretation of the information that they were providing in the session. And then plan. What is your plan going forward? And the plan could be as simple as the client is going to show up again next week, Tuesday at 1 p.m. But you want to have some sort of plan to show that you are providing consistent treatment. And DAP is really popular. A lot of therapists like it. It's really easy. It's really basic. You can throw it in there. If you do use an electronic health record, they typically provide you a template. Some may allow you to create your own template, some don't. A lot of them use the DAP or the last one we're going to look at, SOAP. The next one, those of you who are in LA County may be familiar with this. A lot of people who have worked in community mental health have seen the GURP format. And this can be useful if you tend to do slightly less introspective work. So if you do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, if you do coaching, things like that, I recommend the GURP format. It's really easy to use, actually. Don't let its association with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health taint its view. So goal would be whatever goal you're working on with your client. So that's why I would say is good if you have more goal-directed therapy, something specific you're working on. So you enlist the goal, then you enlist what was your intervention. So that's one thing I like about this template is that it separates out what you do and what the client does. So if you tend to assign a lot of homework or review a lot of tasks or do a lot of teaching or practicing in your sessions, this is really useful because in the intervention section, you highlight what it is that you did. In the response section, you would highlight what was the client's response. So were they engaging? Again, some of that objective data, did they cry during the session? Were they fidgety? Things that they said, client quotes, anything that they responded to in session, and then again with the plan. PAPE is another one that I found a lot of therapists really like. It's not very common, and a lot of people haven't heard of it. But when I introduce this to people, a lot of therapists end up using this one out of all of these four. So you focus on the problem first. So you not focus on the problem, but you list the problem. What is the problem that your client originally came to you for, or what's the problem that you're currently working on in therapy? So that could be as basic as communication with partner, decreasing depression, anything like that. Then the assessment. So this goes back to that DAP format. What was your assessment of the session? How did it go? The intervention. So this again allows for what you did as the therapist, and then the plan. So the weakness with this one is it doesn't allow as much for client information. So like one thing I enjoy doing is including client quotes because I think they can be really useful for summarizing a lot of things. But you could include that in the assessment section. Then the last one is SOAP, which a lot of people have heard of. This is the little training I got in documentation in grad school was focused on using this format. This is personally my least favorite format. It's based more on the medical model. A lot of doctors use this, but some people find it useful. So if it works for you, use it. And this is subjective. So what is the subjective data from the session? So this is kind of like your assessment. What do you infer from the session? What information, based on the objective data that was presented, what is your interpretation of that? So what was the subjective data? Then what was the objective data? So that would be more like what was physically seen or observable. Then what was your assessment of the session? So looking at the subjective data, subjective data, what kind of you were able to extrapolate from that objective information, then bringing it together, what's your assessment of that information? And what's your assessment of how the client's doing based on that information, where therapy is going, implications for treatment, anything like that. And then you would have the plan. All right, so those are all of the templates. One thing I haven't included in there is more of a narrative template. So some people just kind of do a narrative, this happened, then this happened, really keeping it really brief, not like a whole transcript. I actually have a crash course that I offer on documentation. I kind of go through how to use kind of meditation and reflection to focus on more of a narrative format as well. So if you tend to not need the prompts, then maybe a narrative freeform format would work well for you as well. So that's also another option. The key is really to just do what works for you. What I would recommend is if you're not using a template, try it out. So pick one that sounds useful. And I've recommended trying it out a couple of different ways. So one way to try it out is to just pick a template. So let's say you're going to use DAP and use DAP for the whole week with all of your clients. Another option is maybe say, okay, all the clients I see on Tuesday, I'm going to try using this DAP template and I'm going to do that for a month. And then at the end of the month, you can kind of look through the notes and see if it seems to be capturing what you want the notes to capture, and if it seems to flow and you're getting used to it. So those are kind of two different recommendations for how to try out a new template if you want to do that. Another thing with templates is your paperwork. So I would definitely recommend that you use a structured interview form. So a lot of people, most therapists have some kind of assessment intake form that they have clients complete either before the first session, or maybe you do it with your clients during the first session or first couple of sessions. I would definitely recommend that you use a really structured one so that you become familiar with it and that it matches what your needs are. So if you have questions on there that don't really apply to your clients, then delete it, take it out, and reprint it. Or if you have questions on there that you notice most clients miss, and when the information is missed, it's not really that important, again, take it out. So really adapt your forms to your needs and your clients' needs, um, and keep them structured so that you know what they are, and that way you can easily, if you have clients do forms ahead of time, which a lot of people do, you can easily look through them and kind of pick out what what's kind of shouting out at you and highlight those things. And also know your forms really well. So your cancellation policy, your fee structure, your how you document, sorry about the little pencil there, how you document uh, things like cancellations or confidentiality. So your breaches to confidentiality or reasons that you might have to break confidentiality. Know those things well so that you can kind of quickly and easily review them with clients during that first session, and it doesn't become something that takes up a lot of your time. All right. So another thing that may be a little unique, you may not have heard about before, that I would definitely recommend as a useful tool is a dictation software. So if you use a dictation software, then you can say your notes. So you sit down at the computer, you would have to be on a computer for this, and then you just talk and the computer starts typing whenever you're talking. So this can be really useful, especially if you're someone who doesn't like typing, doesn't like writing, and maybe that's contributing to your negative view of documentation. Go ahead and try out a dictation software. Some people might actually have this on your computer already. There's lots of different programs. One that I would recommend that's listed here on the bottom is Dragon Naturally Speaking. So again, I don't get any kind of affiliate fee for this or anything, but it's a really popular program, and it's popular because it's really good. So a lot of people who have difficulties with writing or learning disabilities use this particular program, and it's about $75 to $100, and it's just something you buy, and it's software that you buy and download to your computer, and then it'll work with any other software that you're using. So you could use that for writing papers. You can use it for writing all of your notes within an electronic health record, or even if you're just doing them on your computer, it'll work with anything on your computer. A dictation software can also work really well if you do tend to use more of a narrative format. So if you like more free-form writing and the template doesn't really work for you that well, and you want to be able to just kind of sit down and go through point by point, and that's how you kind of conceptualize your sessions and your notes, then again, this could work really well for you. Let me just grab a sip of water here. Okay, next one is a little controversial, but an outcomes tool. So a lot of therapists are not really a fan of this, and there's some negative association with outcomes tools. So again, if you are familiar with like county mental health systems, um, those are not the outcomes tools I'm talking about necessarily. Um, so I'm not talking about 20-page or 10-page outcomes measures where your clients go through tons and tons of questions. But I would recommend an outcomes tool um, to actually make your documentation easier and to make your to actually improve the clinical quality of your treatment. So what do I mean by that? So it's a quick and easy way to kind of objectively track your progress. One thing that we as therapists tend to be a little scared of is we're so introspective, we tend to be a little bit scared about asking our clients how they really feel about therapy, um, and what that might mean for us, what that might mean about my skills as a clinician, or what that might mean about my connection with this client. So if you use something that's a little bit more objective, it's a really easy way to look at how your clients are feeling about treatment, look at what you're doing, and be able to say, oh, okay, yes, this is working or it's not working, and not focus necessarily on that point, but then focus on, okay, what can we do differently? You can use outcomes tools for a bunch of different things. So there are a lot of different areas you can focus on. And what I'll do is in the Q&A discussion on the ShrinkSync app is I will list a couple of links to different outcomes tools that are available online for free. So it really just depends on what you want to focus on. You can look at ongoing assessment of client satisfaction. So that's probably the scariest thing to look at, but also definitely the most meaningful. Um, and it doesn't have to be, a really clinical sounding document that you have someone fill out, but to kind of just ongoingly ask about client satisfaction and treatment, and what are their needs, and are their needs being fulfilled in treatment. And hopefully we're able to use that to identify the little things that we can focus on, or little things that we can improve as clinicians. Uh, if our clients are doing perfectly, then they're probably not seeing us anymore. So there's always something that they need to focus on a little bit better. Some way that we can improve, some way that we can grow the relationship, the therapeutic relationship as well. You can also look at there are outcomes tools online that will kind of give you a gauge of if your client is feeling like therapy is useful, like they are getting sick or coming, and it'll spit out feedback really quickly. So they can be really easy to complete, and really kind of friendly to use for yourself as well as for clients. There are also tools that are available that will focus more on specific symptomatology. So if you tend to work with clients who have anxiety, for example, it can be really useful to gauge their levels of anxiety. And what's nice is that it gives you kind of a reference point after time passes. So I found, especially after clients have been in treatment for 3-6 months, sometimes they're kind of thinking like, that therapy isn't working, or they're getting frustrated with themselves, that they're not making progress, that they feel that they're not working hard enough. And if you have something that's a little bit more concrete that you can pull out and say, no, look at this here. We've been tracking this for the last 6 months, and you were at a 9 and now you're at a 6. And so that's huge progress. Look what it was like for you to be at a 9. Now, what it's like for you to be at a 6, we still have progress that we can make. Our goal is whatever, a 2, um, but we're working on it. So it can be really nice, because a lot of times the work that we do is just very ambiguous, um, and it's difficult for people to describe. They may be in therapy talking with you, but when someone asks them, okay, well, what did you learn in therapy? Maybe their partner, for example, is asking, we're paying for therapy every week, what is it that you're gaining from this? Um, and using outcomes tools can really help people to verbalize a lot better um, the progress that they're making, strengths that they're identifying, introspections that they've been able to have, all that stuff. So these are things you could do before, you could do them after sessions, you could have people doing them at home, um, you could have them doing this in the waiting room or in the office, anything like that. It really depends on what's your goal with using an outcomes tool. So do you, again, want to just look at client satisfaction? Do you want to look at just client symptoms? Um, and and what you want to do with that information as far as giving the feedback to your client, or is it feedback for you as the clinician for focusing on treatment and making adjustments to treatment. All right, another option, if you're interested in kind of looking at outcomes, but the idea of using like a form or an online tool just isn't really comfortable for you, then you could just start with talking to your clients and doing kind of informal outcomes that way. You could say something like, how are things going for you? So I just want to know, is there anything that I could be doing differently to help you achieve your goals? And a lot of therapists are scared to have that conversation, but that is a really, really meaningful conversation to have and can bring up a lot of powerful things. So even just briefly stating that and opening up all of your sessions one week with that can make a lot of shifts. So at least consider maybe being open to that idea and then doing that on a regular basis. Another idea is that you could do that at regular intervals. So maybe every 3 months, you would kind of have a prompt to yourself. You could put an alert on your calendar to have that discussion, to open up your sessions with that discussion. How are things going for you? I just want to check in with you to see how therapy is going and see if there's anything I could be doing differently to help you achieve your goals. All right. So sort of similar to that, another great tool for documentation is clinical consultation. Um, I would definitely recommend that you get consultation with your colleagues often on different things. Whether you're a part of a regular consultation group that meets weekly, meets monthly, meets quarterly, or whether or not, maybe you have one or two other therapists that you talk to on a regular basis, or that you can meet with for coffee or for lunch to talk about different cases or talk about things. Um, I find that we as therapists sometimes tend to get a little too scared with the confidentiality piece, and we need to reach out a little bit more and talk to one another about some of our cases and get feedback. And again, and it is kind of related to that outcomes tool, looking at, is there something I'm not seeing? Is there something that I'm just blinded by because I'm deep in the treatment with this person and I just can't see it? That can happen a lot. It's really common. So I would recommend that you do meet with colleagues on a regular basis for consultation and that you document those discussions. So in the client file, so your file for Sally A, you talk with your colleague about your treatment with Sally and, this is where we've been going and I feel pretty good about it, but I'm just wondering if we're maybe starting to get a little stuck. And your colleague gives you really great feedback and recommends different certain intervention to try out with Sally. So then write a note about that. That's something that actually shows that you as a clinician are continuing to provide best care, that you are seeking out help, that you're making sure that you're following that clinical standard of care. And it can be really, really useful actually, um, if the worst case scenario were ever to happen and you had a subpoena, or you had what's actually maybe more common when your notes would be read, would be if you had like a board complaint. Uh, then if you've shown that you've been getting consultation from colleagues, especially if you tend to have clients who have difficult situations, maybe clients who have high risk issues, or a client who um, maybe has been having a lot of feelings for you and this is an ongoing thing and it appears to be escalating. Situations like that are great to document that you did a consult with another clinician to show that you're acting appropriately, you're seeking out help, um, you really have a goal of being a competent clinician, and that you're making sure that you're not getting blinded by any of those things. So definitely document those discussions. And again, they can be really brief notes. Just write a really brief note, discussed with um, so-and-so LMFT, uh, ways to improve Sally's anxiety, blah, 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 blah. And then, when you're talking with them, ask them what they would write. So if you were um, meeting with Sally, then what do you think you would be writing about? What would you be talking about in session? What would you be doing? And then you can even ask them to review for you. This is something that it's really common in agencies for our paperwork to be reviewed. So if you work in an agency, you're probably very used to having supervisors or other people look at your paperwork or look at your chart. Maybe working on if you work in a treatment team model, then you probably have multiple people having access to client charts or client files. But in private practice, this really tends to be missed. So if you are in private practice, you are allowed to have other clinicians review your documentation. HIPAA does allow for that. I would recommend, if you are doing that, that you make it a part of your consent. But quality review is allowed. It's not a threat to confidentiality, um, and I would recommend it. Even if you wanted to maybe take out identifying information from a few notes and share them with a colleague, um, and see what they think about what you're doing with certain people or how you're writing your notes. Um, one of the biggest things I hear since I've started my business, and I've shifted from working with people in agencies to working with therapists in private practice, um, is that so many therapists feel that their notes are not up to par. And they wonder if they're writing good notes, but they just don't know. And they wonder if maybe they're writing too much information, if they're not writing enough, and they're terrified that if their charts ever were reviewed at some point, um, that someone is going to say, you weren't doing a good enough job. Um, so one really easy way to avoid this is to have another therapist actually look at some of your notes. And then it's also a great way to share feedback. So, with clinical consultation, one thing that is so fabulous is that I think about something one way and you think about something differently. And we talk about it, and you give me an insight I never would have had on my own. Or you give me an idea or a tool that I would never have been able to get on my own, and vice versa. So, when you have people look at your notes, someone might say, wow, I never would have thought to write it that way. I really think that's cool that you're doing it like that. Um, hey, let me show you what I've been doing. And then you say, oh, wow, that's a really useful thing. I want to implement that into my documentation as well. I'll give you an example. I was doing a group consultation, and uh, two therapists were talking about their different templates and what they think is useful for their practice and what's not, and what they've tried. And And one therapist then was able to say, you know what, I actually realized that one template is useful when I'm doing my intakes, and then when I'm actually in treatment, because of the very specific treatment I do, um, this other template is useful, and so I'm going to change it. And then the other therapist was like, wow, I never would have thought to do that. That makes so much sense. That's really great. Um, so, um, so I would definitely recommend, talking with your colleagues about the treatment you're providing, your clients, and also about your documentation, and get that improving. Uh, so our last um, tool to make documentation easier for you is a clinical chart review. So this is sort of similar to what we were talking about, but a little bit different. Um, I would recommend that you review your client files at least once a year. Most people have probably never done this, especially if you're in private practice. Maybe you worked in an agency where you were required to do this and it was experience and you hated it. Um, but when these are your own clients, I really feel it's important, and it's a great reflection, and it's a great learning experience. So what you can do is just pull out a file. And maybe you decide, every month I'll review 2 files. Reviewing 2 files will not take much time, and you could spend an hour on the 2 files total and get so much information, so much feedback. And you do that once a month. It's only an hour a month, and it's a really great reflection tool, and a practice building tool for yourself. So review your client file, look through the entire file, and kind of see what stands out. And I'm focusing more on your notes. So looking at how treatment has progressed from the time that your client first came in, to the second week, third week, etc., to where you are now. And what really stands out to you? Was there a particular week where something really interesting happened? Do you notice that the same topic is coming up every single week? Do you notice that the client has the same response to certain things that are coming up? Or does your client tend to have patterns that are emerging? Like every single month they have this happen, or it seems like every 2 months there's a crisis, or it seems like after this particular type of incident, there's always a crisis. Uh, really look through the file and just see what stands out to you. So even if you are not in private practice, if you're working at an agency, I would recommend you do this. And again, not the type that your agency would require where you're looking through, are all the treatment plans on time and is this form signed, etc. Excuse me. But looking at your treatment notes and what has been going on in treatment. How are things going? What stands out to you? Um, Maybe you recognize that your client has been no-showing a lot and missing a lot, and you haven't really noticed it. Maybe you really hyper-focused on a client thinking that they no-showed a lot, and you read 2 files and you read that they both have the same show rate. Um, and there was some of your own bias there. So there are different things that might stand out to you. Let me just get a sip of water. Okay, questions to ask yourself when you're doing the review. So is there anything I know that's important that's not coming through on paper? This is really huge because when we're so involved with the case personally and we start writing notes, a lot of times we'll miss certain things because it just seems so obvious to us that we don't think to write it. But if you go back and read through notes for 3 months, 6 months, a year, you'll see that something's missing. And if you have to start making those justifications for yourself or in your own head, like, oh, well, this doesn't say here, but what I really meant was this, and you find yourself doing that multiple times, then that shows you there's something that you need to be writing in your notes that you're missing. So something that's important that's not coming through on paper. And I'm not saying go back and change all your notes, but then okay, you know what? Let me really focus on that. Let me make a note to myself. And next week when I see this person and I'm sitting down to write my note, I'm going to make sure that I think about that in that context. Also, what stands out as a recurring pattern. So again, with, you know, no-show rates or patterns of behavior, patterns of crisis. This can be really, really important. If you have clients where you're starting to feel stuck, I would recommend sitting down and doing a chart review. So sit down with the client file and look at all of your notes from the first time they came in to see you till now. And I'll bet you'll see some kind of pattern or you'll see something emerge that might help you get out of that stuck place. Another question to ask is what stands out as a strength of my client? Um, I really believe in being strengths-based and in focusing on strengths with clients. So there may be things that you realize like, wow, um, and it may be as simple as, um, goodness, we've been through so much. I can't believe how much this client has gone through in such a short amount of time, or how much progress we've made in such a short amount of time. And that's something you can point out to your client the next time you see them. And it's something that can again help you shape your view of your clients as well. And then lastly, is there anything that's not complete or not signed or anything you need to update? So that might be maybe you look through a record and you see that you've been seeing a client for 2 years and you realize you updated your policies 6 months ago and you're like, oh, hey, I guess when I updated all that paperwork, I didn't talk to this person about it. So it may also bring up some kind of administrative things that you want to focus on or fix as well. So take that opportunity to do that. And sort of think of it like, when you look through old pictures, sometimes maybe from a few years ago, and you start to notice things that you didn't really see in the moment. That's what a file review or a chart can do for you. It can really highlight things that you've been missing. All right, so to review our 8 great tools, there are a lot of ways to make documentation simpler. Hopefully, these 8 ways have helped you to kind of see that. But mindset, accountability, and support are really the keys to successful documentation. So having a positive outlook, keeping yourself accountable through things like schedules or tools that you need to use, like an electronic record, especially if you're poor with organization, and then having supportive colleagues through consultation are really, really the keys to being successful. My take-home tip would be if you do choose just one thing to try out of all of these 8 tools that I've talked about today, I would say do the last one, do the client file review. Just pick 2 clients. Don't worry about doing it for all of your clients or setting a schedule for yourself or anything. Just pick 2 client files, review them front to back, and ask yourself those questions. Try to be as objective as possible. I guarantee you that you will learn something about your client and that you'll learn something about yourself as a therapist as well. And that it will also help you to view your documentation differently. Whether that means that you feel like you need to up your game a little bit and improve things because there seems to be a lot missing, or whether that means you feel like you're doing really well and you want to keep it up. If you do feel like there are a lot of things missing, one thing I will say with documentation, um, there's different debates about things being long or short or writing too much, that kind of thing. Um, really, the key is you can never rely on your memory, and that client file is the only thing you have to tell the story of this client's treatment. So if that story isn't clearly coming through, then you want to look through that file and see how you can better tell that story, because you want that story to come through in that file. All right, so questions, again, there is going to be in the community section of the ShrinkSync app, I'm going to post the title of this our webinar, 8 great tools to making documentation easier. And please go on there, post any questions you have. If you also have feedback, like if you say, oh, I do use an outcome tool and I use this one, it's been really helpful. Anything that could help your colleagues, throw that in there, please. And I hope to talk with you there. Thank you so much and happy writing. And I will see you on the ShrinkSync app.